The Morning Majority on 630 WMAL.
Good morning, 707. We are pleased to have on the phone Congressman DARRELL ISSA, who is conducting an investigation of the Fast and Furious probe that was carried out by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. It's been quite controversial because the program basically allowed a lot of weapons to walk across into Mexico, where apparently they were not traced in a significant way. And now there is a new development in this, in that there is a guy by the name of William Newell at ATF who was apparently, now we know, briefing a man by the name of Kevin O'Reilly at the NSC. And that Kevin O'Reilly was then turning around and briefing other people in the White House, including a special assistant to the president. Congressman Issa, thank you so much for joining us. Where are we in the investigation, and how high up do we think this may go?
Well, it only goes to the White House, so not particularly high up. Good morning, Brian. Obviously, this is one of those programs that requires top-level clearance for wiretap permissions, for funding, this was a joint operation and included the FBI, every one of the alphabet soup, starting with the ATF. And this was one of those things that, a little bit like Iran-Contra, way back in people's memory, somebody thought was a good idea, and lots of people didn't say, hold it, people could get killed. Hold it. How will this look if it doesn't work perfectly? And not only didn't it work perfectly, but when it kept not working, when they kept losing weapons, when they clearly did not have control of this program, they actually sold more of them, sped up the program, in hopes that they'd get a big catch of them somewhere at a crime scene. Unfortunately, they got a cache of 2 at Brian Terry's murder.
Yeah. Do you have any evidence yet to suggest that they knew about the details of the program that have turned out to be quite controversial?
Well, that's one of the interesting things as we've gone through this. The Justice, and if you will, the Obama administration, has sort of consistently wanted to give us somebody new to go after. They started off wanting us to go after the local ATF agents. Well, as we found these and other whistleblowers coming in giving us emails showing they objected to this program for the most part, that didn't work. Then they wanted us to go after the U.S. Attorney and the Assistant U.S. Attorney. But along the way, we became aware that Lanny Brewer, right there next to Eric Holder in Justice, and others had to approve and did approve these programs. And just when we figured, okay, they're going to just fess up and this thing will go away with a system to make sure it doesn't happen again, they began trying to go after the ATF director, Kenneth Nelson, and even imply that I'd been briefed fully testimony by Kenneth Nelson that he didn't know at the time that he gave me a briefing on a somewhat unrelated subject. And very clearly, it does go to the top. The question is, did Eric Holder know and did he lie? Or did Eric Holder not want to know so much that even after in March of 2009 he made a speech about the upcoming program, he then didn't know about the program so long after Senator Grassley was sending demand letters wanting to know more about it.
I have so many questions, and the others want to get in, but let me just ask one more. Kenneth Nelson reassigned and basically put in a position. One wonders if he was put in a position and kept under control of the Department of Justice so he really couldn't talk to you.
No, not at all. He is a willing, voluntary witness, along with a great many other men and women, or men actually all in this case, who have come forward and testified on the record, under oath, without needing subpoenas or by asking for a subpoena only to protect their careers. Kenneth Nelson is one of those people who has a stellar record as a U.S. attorney. This is a mar on his record. There's no question that he should have been a better manager of 1,800 men and women of the ATF than he was. He knows that he will live with an upset stomach and a memory that people died because he didn't control programs better under his watch. But he also knows that justice had this happen and kept him in the dark.
I'm talking with DARRELL ISSA, Chairman of the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. Have you ever gotten an answer as to why they thought this was a good idea?
It makes about as much sense looking in the taillight or the rearview mirror as Iran-Contra did. It is just that dumb. The idea that you would let weapons go to the worst of the worst drug cartels in hopes that you would find out the trafficking pattern of them, well, look, if that actually was going to work, then you'd already know the trafficking pattern and cocaine and other drugs that they're trafficking, or even the money, how the money goes back through the process. You cannot track a gun nearly as well as you can track money, and that was one of the inherent problems. Only twice did there ever even have a tracking device. Not once did they do ballistics so they could match a bullet at a crime scene to a weapon. Instead, you have to get the weapon at the crime scene, and as a result, there were plenty of people on both sides of the border who may have been killed with weapons that were part of this program, but if the weapon wasn't left at the scene of the crime, we may never know.
But do you think it was possible that it was a political motive to show that, hey, guns being sold in America are going across the border and being used on American citizens by the drug cartels, just to show that, hey, we need to crack down more on gun sales in this country?
Well, it may have very well had political overtones and gun control. There's no question that saying that we needed tighter controls to help Mexico may very well have been part of their thinking. I think, bizarrely, they didn't think about the fungibility of guns, that they might not all go south of the border, or they might come back over as these traffickers brought drugs and coyotes bringing people back over. And that's one of the things that becomes so obvious is, if you didn't have respect for the life of the people in Mexico, you had to figure inevitably out of 2,500 plus weapons, some Americans would die, and they have.
What's the schedule on this, Representative, as far as, do we have public hearings coming up soon? Are we aiming for that at any particular time?
Well, what we try to do is do a thoughtful investigation, right, both voluntary and subpoenas, and my investigators are doing that. The public hearings, sort of the way they've been done in the past, I try to only do them when we really can use that to refuel, if you will, people's cooperation and awareness to help us. So we don't have one scheduled immediately, as you this morning. At the same time as we're doing these investigations and trying to get the administration to fall in line on many areas that they're out of compliance on, we're also dealing with a bankruptcy at the Postal Service, where
right,
they literally have defaulted and will continue to default if they're not reorganized into a profitable business unit instead of a stepchild of the federal government claiming that they don't take money. Well, in fact, they're going to take money inevitably if they keep losing money at this rate.
Well, you have a bill on that, correct?
We do, and our postal reform bill is beginning to catch a lot of momentum. The newspapers have been supporting it. Senator McCain is now actively talking about a companion in the Senate. The big problem is you have to look at the postal unit as a business, just like UPS or FedEx, and say, what's wrong with it? And the answer is it has 150 to 200,000 too many people, and it does some pretty inefficient things. It's not about federal jobs. It's about whether they can do the job. It's not about their pay and benefits. It's about whether or not there's too many people getting pay and benefits. And it's a simple problem, but it's going to be very painful to change because this is a post office that, as it's shrunk in volume, keeps assuming that attrition will take care of them. And right now, with a $10 billion loss this year, and understand in government $10 billion we gloss over, but this is $65 billion in sales, $10 billion in loss. Anyone who's ever looked at a business losing that kind of delta of 65x in sales, 10 of them is a loss, realizes this is a big turnaround that has to happen quickly.
Congressman, one more last question on Fast and Furious, if you don't mind, and that is that the one thing that's bothered me about this is that the idea was to sell guns and track them into Mexico, but then yet it seemed unclear how they were tracking them once they got into Mexico. And the only thing that ever made any sense to me is that somehow somebody, maybe the CIA, some other intelligence organization, had people in deep cover within Mexico, and that's the part of this that nobody wants to talk about. Any indication that might be the case?
If only there was, Brian. If we saw that they had a sort of 3 steps down the road, really had tracking and cover on these weapons, we'd be delighted to say so. We've looked deep and hard. We have talked to our various covert agencies and gotten pretty solid response of no. Having said that, one of the challenges is they didn't actually have a plan based on sworn testimony to track it into Mexico.
Right.
They had the belief that serial numbers would reoccur and they would begin mapping, if you will, where these weapons ended up. If they weren't deadly weapons, we probably all could understand why you would do this.
All right, Congressman Issa, thanks very much for coming on the show.